Welcome to The Scoop, NANP's monthly educational webinar series. I am your host, Andrea Granson. These webinars are recorded and everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording. NANP members can earn 1 continuing education credit for participating in Scoop webinars by taking the corresponding quiz, which can be found in the membership area of the NANP website. Today's webinar will conclude with a Q&A session, so feel free to type in your questions as we go along so we can get to as many as possible at the end. Okay, let's get started. So today, our guest presenter is Andi Locke. Andi has worked in the holistic alternative field for over 25 years. She's a certified holistic health practitioner and a certified whole health educator with a master's degree in peace and humane studies. Andi has training and experience working with herbal medicine, complex homeopathy for hormone rejuvenation, and expertise in nutrition, traditional naturopathy, and colon health. Andi has been a German New Medicine teacher and consultant since 2009 and spent 3 years on the German New Medicine international team. She had a successful wellness center, Calm Health Limited, in Maine before shifting her attention to teaching German New Medicine full-time. Welcome, Andi, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's wonderful to be here and to be part of NANP again. You guys are the best, I will say. So today I'll be giving you a brief introduction to German New Medicine. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of GNM before. And if you haven't, that's okay. I'm going to give you the brief overview today. It is growing in the United States. We are starting to see a small swelling occur. So I'm really excited by that. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my PowerPoint here. It's my little disclaimer. And so what I'm going to say in the beginning is, like I said, the basics of GNM. Now, this is an entirely different paradigm for all diseases and symptoms in the physical body. So it's a different perspective of the disease process, of the body, and of how to be healthy. So I always ask everyone to have an open mind because that really is what it takes. It is such a different paradigm. I want you to be skeptical. I don't want you to simply believe anything I say. I think skepticism is not only healthy, but I think it's really important for intuitive discernment. So I will be teaching 4 of the 5 biological laws today, and I recommend that you take the information I give you, you test it, you challenge it, you really look at it in your own life and in the life of your family and in the world around you. I think that GNM is a lot like gravity, and it's a bit like love as well. You don't have to believe in gravity, although I think most people do. But you can see its effects. So if you drop a pen, it is not going to go up. We know it's going to go down. We absolutely believe that. Regardless of what your belief is, it will go down. And you don't have to believe in love, but you can feel it. And your physiological response to it can be measured regardless of your beliefs about it. So what you're going to learn today is a little bit like gravity. It's a little bit like love. You can see the effects of it. You can feel its effects, and you can measure its effects in different ways, regardless of your beliefs. So in the brief overview today, we're going to start with a little bit of anatomy. And for our purposes today, we're focusing on 4 areas of the brain, which have 3 distinct colors in German New Medicine. The brainstem, as you can see, is yellow, and that's right over here. The cerebellum is orange. The cerebral medulla is also orange, although it looks a slight bit darker, but it really is about the same color there. And then we've got the cerebral cortex, which is what we often think of our brain, and that is in red. So the top 2, from a GNM perspective, are known as the old brain. So these develop first in an embryo and also on the planet in an evolutionary stage. In an evolutionary sense, the brainstem develops first. The second ones, the ones on the bottom, the medulla and the cerebral cortex, are known as the new brain. So they are old, they are newer in the sense that they develop last. So in a developing embryo, a developing fetus, these will be the last parts of the brain that will develop. And of course, we've got the higher thought is attributed to humans, and those higher on the food chain as far as being the cerebral cortex and even the medulla. So we'll take that cerebral cortex over here and we're going to break it down into some sections. These are pretty typical for what you see as brain anatomy today. We have the premotor sensory cortex or frontal cortex right here on your forehead. Behind that is a slice of motor cortex, sensory cortex, post-sensory cortex, and visual cortex. So just a little visual there. The words that I'll use today are mostly going to be those four that we talked about on the other slide. So I'm going to start with a story that illustrates the discovery of the information I'm presenting to you today. It is 1978, and there was a German physician by the name of Dr. Ryke Geerd Hamer. And on August 18th, 1978, he received a shocking phone call that his son, his teenage son, Dirk, had been shot, accidentally shot while on vacation, which of course is the worst thing you can hear as a parent, that your child has been injured in such a violent manner. Dr. Hamer and his wife went to Dirk's side, and 4 months later, Dirk died in his arms. You can only imagine what that feels like, what that felt like for Dr. Hamer. Here he is, a gifted physician. He was an inventor of medical patents, and here he had a son who died in his arms. Shortly after Dirk's death, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer. Now, Dr. Hamer is not a woo-woo man. He's not a mind-body-spirit man, all right? Was always very healthy, and he just started to think, oh my gosh, I've always been so healthy, and now I have this huge trauma in my life, and now I have cancer. There's got to be some sort of correlation here. Again, he's not woo-woo, he's not mind-body-spirit, okay? He's not going there like you and I might. So it was these heart-wrenching events that really started his amazing discoveries and his exploration. So he started to look at the possible relationship between shock and disease. And so what he did was he went to his patients. He worked at the cancer clinic at the University of Munich, and he started to talk to them. And he soon learned that, like him, they had all had some sort of unexpected emotional distress prior to their diagnosis. So he went further. He analyzed his patients' brain CT scans. This was new, so this was the early 80s. CT scans had been out for, less than 10 years, so it was kind of the new toy. So he took everyone's brain scan who was in the clinic. Why not, right? So he analyzed every single brain scan, thinking, maybe I'll find something, and he did. He realized that every single one of them had a targeted ring formation, like a circle, like a bullseye, in their brain in different locations, different areas in the brain scan. So he's thinking, what is that? He went to the company that makes the CT scan equipment, and he said, hey, I'm seeing these little circles, what's going on? And they're like, no, it's nothing. They called it an artifact. Yet it seemed to not be random to him. He thought there was a logic to this. So he analyzed thousands of brain CT scans, and he found that, this is the amazing part, that all patients with the same disease had the lesion in the same place in the brain. So then he compared their medical histories and their emotional or personal histories, and he realized that everyone who had experienced the same emotional conflict all had the circle in the same area in the brain, and they all had the same diagnosis of cancer. This was true in 100% of his patients. There were no exceptions. So what he discovered was that every disease, this is what's new, every disease from, let's say, a common cold to cancer to food intolerances to warts to a heart attack, it's all initiated by an unexpected conflict shock. So this was a very unique and very new approach to understanding disease. He was really the first person to look at disease in this manner. When he delved further, he discovered that the psyche, the brain, and the body constitute a single biological unit. So let's start with, what is the psyche? So for our purposes, I want you to think of the psyche as that part of your body that perceives and interprets the world around you. So it includes your senses, your 5 senses, your nervous system, and your brain. Now, this is not the Freudian definition. So if you've studied psychology, you're right now saying, that's not what the psyche is. So this is Dr. Hamer's definition of what the psyche is. I guess everyone can make up their own definition, I think. So the psyche is that part of your body that perceives and interprets the world around you. So he discovered that the brain, the psyche, the brain, and organs and tissues in the body all act together as a single unit to protect us. At the moment of the conflict shock, he got that awful phone call that his son had been shot. At that moment, in his psyche and in his brain, the lesion appeared instantly in his brain, and a program begins in a specific organ or tissue. This program is called an SBS, which is, it's actually a German word that we've sort of loosely translated into English as a special biological special program. And this is something that starts because we are hardwired for survival. All organisms are hardwired for survival. You'll see survival mechanisms in plants. Think of thorns. Think of poison ivy. These are survival mechanisms. In animals, we see survival mechanisms. The possum will play dead, and then they'll be ignored. Oh, it's like, oh, that's dead, I'm not going to get near it. Or the skunk, we know what the skunk does. So there are survival mechanisms in all species. So I'll start with the first biological law here, and what he said, what he determined was that every disease and symptom, a special biological program, originates from an unexpected, highly acute, and isolating conflict shock, which he called a DHS after his son, Dirk Hamer syndrome, that occurs simultaneously in the psyche, the brain, and on the corresponding organ. So the conflict shock, it's an emotionally distressing event you were not anticipating. Since it's unexpected, you cannot prepare for it, you cannot prevent it. You had no idea it was going to happen. So from a biological standpoint, think of yourself as an animal, okay? It's unexpected. So if something unexpected happens to you and you're hardwired for survival, your body's going to say, uh-oh, this might be a danger. We need to start the survival mechanisms. And that's exactly what it does. So the SBS is activated in times of distress to help us survive. Why? Why would our body do this? What is the significance of this? The reason that we have these programs, these SBSs, is to improve the functioning of the organ or tissue for that point in time, so we can more easily manage this conflict and hopefully resolve it sooner rather than later and get back to our normal life. Let that sink in. I want to point out this is not psychological. So we are not, and when I say psychological, I'm saying your mind, your mental and emotional states. We are not talking about those per se. What Dr. Hamer discovered is that the symptoms that arise directly, what he realized is that it's all biological, that even though we have emotions, even though we have thoughts in that moment, they're part and parcel, but what he's talking about here is biological. It is not psychological. It is not emotional. It is not mental. All of those are active and working, and yet we're talking about our biology, and this is really important to understand. This is biological. There is no blame for disease. We don't cause them with our thoughts and our feelings. The cause is rooted inside our bodies, which are always striving to survive. So like I said, there are always thoughts and feelings felt with a conflict shock. Usually there are, unless you're so stunned that that's what you're feeling, is stunned and feeling nothing. These emotions can also be very strong, but they are not the cause of the original biological program. It's our upbringing, our beliefs, our fears, our personality, the culture in which we live. All of these contribute to how we perceive a conflict in our lives, but none of them start or cause the SBS to begin. So none of this is random. And this will make more sense in a few minutes, so hang with me. So here's the second biological law. It states that every program runs in 2 phases as long as the conflict has been resolved. And the resolution is a super important part. So what I'm going to do is teach you this 2-phase diagram, because this is basically the heart and soul of German New Medicine. So here you see a horizontal line. Above that is our daytime nervous system. So it's our sympathetic nervous system. And below that line is our parasympathetic, putting it very simply. So we're awake, we're asleep. We have our circadian rhythm. Here's a 24-hour period. We're awake, now we're asleep. We're awake, now we're asleep. All right, this is true for all of us. We all have this. Then we receive a shock, a conflict shock. That's the purple box, and that's the Geerd Hamer syndrome. And I'll just call it the conflict shock. Again, it's an unexpected event. So what happens to our nervous system? Look at the blue arrows. They're higher, right? So we're in fight or flight. The normal day-night cycle of our nervous system has been interrupted. The shock impacts a specific area in the brain, causing a lesion within seconds. We all have them. We've all had them numerous times. The lesion, he called it a Hamer focus, and that's what he saw on the CT scans. So now we enter the first of the 2 phases, and this is called the conflict active phase. And you can see it's in blue, and our nervous system is heightened. We're sympathetic dominant. And what we notice is that we're upset. So right now we just got a really bad phone call, or our boss just yelled at us, or our kid, or our spouse just yelled at us, and we're upset. At the moment the lesion appears, we are now conflict active. Our brain turns on one of 3 biological programs that begins at the organ or tissue level. The 3 programs are cell proliferation, so we're growing cells somewhere, cell loss, and functional loss. The purpose of these, again, is to help our body manage our issue so we can get through it and get back to our lives. So our body knows that, our brain knows that for this particular conflict and the way we have perceived it, in order to get through this, we need to make a part of the body stronger with more cells or weaker with less cells, or we need to underfunction an organ, because that will help us resolve this conflict. This is so counterintuitive to how we've been raised, and I get that. It's also very counterintuitive to holistic health. I get that as well. Stay with me though, because we're going to bring it all together here. We do have all kinds of shocks. Our brain knows this. And so we're conflict active. Now at some point, maybe it's 2 seconds later, maybe it's 20 years later, hopefully it's just a few minutes later, we resolve this conflict. And that is the next purple box, which is the CL. It's called conflictolysis. We'll just call it the resolution. So we've resolved it. So we had a fight with our husband, and now we've talked and we've made up. And that's the resolution. But we were conflict active for, let's say, 2 hours. So we were growing cells, losing functioning for 2 hours. But all of that occurs below our level of consciousness. We are not aware of that. As soon as we resolve it, we enter phase 2, which is called the healing phase or the resolution phase. And we enter it in phase A. There are 2 phases here. In phase A, if we had cell growth in the conflict-related organ, so cell proliferation, during the conflict active phase, then the organ will now break down those cells because we don't need them anymore to make that organ stronger and bigger to resolve the conflict. It's resolved. We don't need them anymore. We break them down and we resolve them. If we had cell loss in the conflict-related organ, then now at this point, we're going to replenish those cells. we've got holes somewhere, little tiny microscopic holes. We're going to replenish those. If we had functional loss when we were conflict active, now we're going to regain functioning. Regardless of the program, especially cell loss or cell growth, there will be pain, swelling, and inflammation as we break down those cells or replenish them. Pain, swelling, and inflammation. And that's because we are now going to have swelling in that circle in the brain to protect it, and we'll have swelling in the organ. Healing always takes place in a liquid environment, right? So if you cut yourself, pretty soon there's going to be pain, swelling, and inflammation because that is what heals us. So we will see that here, and that is PCLA, what we call PCLA, phase A. And now, as you know, pain, swelling, and inflammation are uncomfortable. The healing phase, this whole phase that we're talking about now, it's what conventional medicine would call being sick. Our symptoms, however, are actually helping to restore our body's homeostasis. The symptoms are not bad, they are not wrong. There is a very specific reason for every single one of them. At the end of phase A, and halfway through the healing phase, halfway through here, we have what's called an epicrisis, an epileptoid crisis, or we call it an epicrisis. It's considered the height of healing. It's nothing more than the pushing out of the liquid of the lesion in the brain and in the organ. And that's because we've done all the healing we've needed to do. We've broken down all the cells that need to be broken down, or we've replenished all the cells that need to be broken down. That liquid that was protecting us, now we're done with it. Now we're going to get rid of it. So the pushing out is the epicrisis. If you've ever had a fever, I mean, we've all had a fever, right? You feel that fever and you're achy and your head hurts and your joints hurt and you just can't even get out of bed. You can barely drink your chicken soup. That's phase A. And then sometime in the night, your fever breaks and you're like, oh, you wake up the next morning, your fever's down. That's because you just went through your epicrisis and now you're in phase B. You know you're on the mend. So in phase B, what happens is the glial cells will accumulate in the circle in the brain. Let me go, before I get to that, let me say the epicrisis could look like a cough. It could look like a heart attack. It could look like, your fever broke. So there are many different types of epicrises. It all depends on what program ran, all right? So after the epicrisis is phase B. There's the accumulation of the glial cells, which are the connective tissue that make up about 90% of your brain. Neurons or nerve cells are the other 10%. And the glial cells are accumulating in the lesion in the brain to repair it. And this is what the old medicine will call a brain tumor. There are 4 grades of brain tumor, according to the old medicine, from mild to severe. And what Dr. Hamer discovered is that they are all part of the natural healing process. So the more intensive the DHS and the conflict activity, the more intense the healing phase and the epicrisis. And this is why we want to always downgrade. Once we learn GNAM, we understand when we're conflict active. We want to downgrade this as soon as we can, so this is much less. So in other words, if you have a huge, big conflict and you downgrade it, you'll have the sniffles for a few days instead of having a cold for 2 weeks and bronchitis. And this is very empowering information. Okay, so what is next? Here is a picture of a generic CT scan. And I'm just showing you this, because this is what Dr. Hamer was looking at. This is a picture, they take slices of the brain, starting from the bottom of the brain to the top. So here's the bottom of the brain. It's taken, if you could see me, it's like it's going from front to back. So slicing up through your brain is all these pictures. And what you see here is there's a picture of the brainstem. He saw circles there in the cerebellum, cerebral medulla. Now we're further up in the brain. We're more than halfway up. Here's the cerebral cortex. The very bottom right is the very top of our brain. All right, so imagine we're in a helicopter looking down. So the main point of this is that I wanted to show that the location of the lesion in the brain is predetermined by the nature of the conflict shock. And that is determined by our individual perception of the conflict. So our psyche is the one that determines where the impact is in the brain and thus which program is turned on. I'll give some examples. Let's say we have a man who dies in a car accident suddenly. His wife, will focus on his wife. She may have a lost conflict, having lost the love of her life. That will impact as a cell growth in her ovaries. Or maybe she'll have a separation conflict. That will impact as a cell loss in the lining of the milk ducts in the right breast if she's right-handed. Maybe she'll have a starvation conflict. Oh my gosh, he supported me, how will I get by? And that will impact in the liver with a cell growth. Maybe she's more concerned for their kids growing up without a dad, and that's a nest worry conflict. That will impact as a cell growth in the breast glands of the left breast for a right-handed woman. Or maybe she'll feel stuck, like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? How do I live my life? And that will impact in her muscles with a functional loss. Or an existence conflict or abandonment conflict, and that will be a cell growth in the kidneys. You can see this is very, very specific. The stuck conflict could eventually be called ALS or polio or MS. It's all the same program. So as you can see, it's our individual perception of the conflict that determines which part of the brain will receive the shock and thus what physical symptoms that manifest. So I'm going to look very briefly at the third biological law. And the third BL says that, this law connects the programs that run with the evolutionary development of the organism. So it illustrates how these programs are part of a meaningful biological system inherent in every species. And it really highlights that Dr. Hamer's discoveries are all part of a very meaningful, purposeful system, and it is not accidental. There's nothing random in the body. It's also true for animals. That is, yeah. So that's all I'm going to say there. This is out of place. Yeah, so now all right, I'll go back to it. So here we have the 3 germ layers. So when you think of our germ layers, now this is embryology, this is not German new medicine. When we, at about 3 weeks or so, 2 weeks or so of an egg being fertilized, it breaks off into 3 germ layers. And all of our organs and tissues grow from these 3 germ layers. Again, this is embryology, not GNM. And so what you can see here, the first one that grows is the oldest one, the internal layer, which is the endoderm germ layer. And then the mesoderm, which is the middle layer. And then the last one to grow is the ectoderm, the external layer. So what Dr. Hamer realized, and it was really embryologists who confirmed all of his information, was that the organs originating from the same embryonic germ layer are controlled from the same area of the brain. So this was new and embryologists were thrilled. So what he discovered was that the brainstem controls all the organs made from the endoderm. So the cell growth that will happen when you're conflict active, the brainstem will control all of the endoderm organs and tissues. And then he discovered that the cerebellum and the cerebral medulla control all the organs made from the mesodermal tissue. And also that the cerebral cortex controls all the organs and tissues made from the ectoderm germ layer. All right, so that's all I'm going to say there. There's a bit more to it, but that's good for now. This is a brief overview. The fourth biological law, which I think you'll like this one, it says that it explains the beneficial role of microbes in the body, and microbes also correlate to the 3 embryonic germ layers. And as you know, we've got lots of microbiome info now, and functional medicine has certainly jumped on board with all that. What we know is that Dr. Hamer took the role of microbes in the body to an entirely new level that functional medicine hasn't even caught up with yet. He realized that microbes don't and mycobacteria such as TB bacteria, yes, tuberculosis type bacteria, is controlled by endoderm, by the brainstem, and also the cerebellum, versus the cerebral medulla it controls the bacteria. These are your average run-of-the-mill bacteria, not the mycobacteria such as TB. So these would be like streptococcus or staphylococcus. So as you can see, these are older on an evolutionary pattern. You know, these are older. These are a little bit newer. And then, of course, what we have even newer than that is viruses, if they even exist. There's a lot of controversy in the medical community itself because they have never isolated a virus. And there have been books that have been written by that. Again, this is an entirely new perspective. There's a book if you're interested in learning more. This is a very brief snapshot of the fourth biological law. And so what I want to share with you now, and I see something that says the sound is gone. Andrea, are we still good?
We are still good. Sorry, I lost internet connection, but hopefully everyone was still on, but I can hear you perfectly well.
Okay, so I'll just keep going.
Yeah, keep going, yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's see. So now I want to just give you an idea of what we can, okay, thank you, Sarah, for that. And so think of chronic diseases, because I want to bring it around to that. And I'm really jumping ahead. This is much later in the program that I teach, but I wanted to give you some more information. So here's our two-phase diagram. And what we're going to talk about now is anything that is chronic. What we've been talking about are single programs up until then. So let's say you have a conflict shock and then 2 hours later you resolve it. So you have that, you're upset with your husband and then you resolve it and then you have a short healing phase and then you're back to normal. Well, what if you don't go back to normal? What if every spring you have allergies? What if you have pain that doesn't go away? What if you have tremors that don't go away? What if you have diarrhea that doesn't go away? So that's what we're talking about now. What Dr. Hamer called it was a hanging healing. It's anything that is chronic or reoccurring, like seasonal allergies. So here we have a little change in our two-phase diagram, but here we have our day-night cycle over to the left. And then we have a conflict shock. And so now this person is in the conflict active phase. There are not symptoms in the conflict active phase, but they are upset. Now they resolve it. And now they go into the healing phase. And now there are symptoms. There's pain, swelling, and inflammation because your body is trying to bring back to homeostasis the changes that occurred in this pattern, in the conflict active phase. But before we can get all the way through the healing phase, oh no, we have a relapse of that conflict. So now we're conflict active again. There's no symptoms in the conflict active phase. So the symptoms that were healing us now go away or they reduce. Now we're conflict active again. But pretty soon we resolve that. So now we go back into the healing phase. But then that gets interrupted. Now we're conflict active again. And then we resolve it. And so on and so forth. All right. And this is anything that is chronic. So we go back and forth getting triggered and re-triggered. And this can happen within seconds. Once your body is used to having a circle turned on in the brain, once it's turned on once, it can be easily turned on again, much more easily. So we can turn it off with just a thought. We can turn it on with just a thought, in other words. So looking at this, when you experience a conflict shock, your mind is super aware. And if you've ever had a huge shock, you feel this. You feel like time is standing still. You feel stunned. You can't even think straight. You try to comprehend what just happened. Actually, what's going on is our subconscious is highly alert right now, and it's picking up on everything around us that it determines is relevant to this conflict, and it stores it in the brain. So who we're with, the barometric pressure, the weather, the season, if we're smelling mold, if we're smelling ragweed, if we're at work versus home, if we have cats and dogs around us, if we just ate peanut butter, if we just had bread, what we're feeling as well. All of these things that are there at the moment of the original conflict shock get stored in the brain. Any of these elements leave imprints. These elements leave imprints in us. We call them tracks. And any one of them can later become a trigger that sets the program in motion. And this is known as setting on a track. So it's like what you see right here. It's like you're going forward, but you're on a railroad track and you're going around in a circle. And you just stay on this circle and you're at wit's end. You just can't seem to get off of it, no matter what diet you try, no matter what herbs and supplements you try, no matter what surgeries and meds you try, you're still stuck with this. And it repeats over and over again due to conflict relapses. So anytime you're around one of these elements that was present at the moment of the conflict shock, and that can include simply talking about the event or having a dream about it, you set on a track. You're instantly conflict active, maybe for 1 second. A second later, you're in the healing phase, which means you have symptoms again. And time this occurs, the healing phase is prolonged. Goldenrod, thank you, you're right. So in other words, it becomes chronic. It's a similar principle to when you smell oatmeal raisin cookies and you're 5 years old again in your grandmother's kitchen, except this is a conscious memory. It's a conscious example. You know your grandma used to make these. What I'm talking about is usually below your level of consciousness. Again, when your subconscious picks up on any one of those elements that it sensed at the moment of the conflict shock, there's a replay of the conflict active phase and then the healing phase. This is what the old medicine calls an allergy or any reoccurring condition: arthritis, Parkinson's, asthma, skin rashes, IBS, diabetes, hypothyroidism, all of it. How are we doing on time? About 5 more minutes?
Yeah. We don't have a lot of
Okay.
questions, so you can keep going for a good 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Let's see, we're going to look at a couple of examples now, and just so I can relate this to real life, we'll start with the cell growth, and we'll look at lung cancer. That is a death-fright conflict. So anyone who experiences a death-fright conflict will grow extra cells in their lungs, and that will help them. So in this phase, they're growing extra cells. In this part, they will break those cells down. That's what the old medicine will call lung cancer. Let's look at a cell loss. That would be like a sore throat. It feels scratchy, but it's not sore. It just feels a little scratchy. In the healing phase, it will be sore because there's pain, swelling, and inflammation as we replenish those cells that we lost. And that's the conflict is not wanting to swallow a morsel. A morsel is anything that occurred, an idea, an event, some bad news. It's anything. There's a functional loss. Let's look at vertigo. That is loss in the vestibular branch of the vestibular cochlear nerve, which results in a loss of balance. So you'll feel like you're spinning or falling to one side during your conflict active phase. And it's a balance or a conflict or a falling conflict. So it could also be a fall from grace. You know, you think you're going to be fired or you saw somebody fall from a bridge or something. And during the epicrisis, you'll have a vertigo fit where there's nausea and all kinds of different kinds of, you might even vomit if it's really bad. So those are just 3 examples. Let's look briefly at what does learning GNM really mean to us. I'm going to look at GNM in practice here. So let's say we have a client that comes in who has hypothyroidism. They've got a little bit of pain in their gallbladder and they're tired. So if you know GNM right here, you know an enormous amount of information about them. So looking at the thyroid, so we know the thyroid gland, you can see the yellow part is the gland, the red are the ducts. But for them, it's going to be the thyroid gland, which means their conflict was they were too slow to catch a morsel or too slow to eliminate a morsel. This is your basic soccer mom. They're running around trying to get everything done. They're trying to get everything done and they just can't. There's always something else on their to-do list. So not fast enough or too slow to catch or eliminate a morsel. And so it just happens day after day. They never get caught up. Always busy, type A, driven, always on the move, lots of obligations. There's cell growth during the conflict active phase, cell breakdown during the healing phase, and then eventually there's enough tissue loss so their thyroxine levels kind of bottom out. The lesion is in the brainstem. We know that as well. They'll often be very excited or nervous or irritable or just tired all the time. They'll have trouble sleeping, so they never rejuvenate. You'll probably see yeast, fungus, or TB bacteria present because of the extra cells that may be being broken down in the healing phase. Again, fatigue, low energy, pain, swelling due to pain due to swelling, difficulties breathing and swallowing, and they might have night sweats. And they'll have adrenal issues with especially low cortisols. Gallbladder, they have pain in their gallbladder. So the gallbladder is the red, and everything's color-coded in GNM, so we know red is an ectoderm germ layer, so it is cell loss in the conflict active phase. It's a territorial anger or an identity conflict. Territorial anger is male, identity conflict is female. They are kind of the same thing. It's just, yeah, Dr. Hamer gave them slightly different names. So if they're male or a postmenopausal woman or pregnant or on birth control, it's a territorial anger conflict, cycling female, and identity conflict. Who am I? Where do I belong? The lesions in the temporal lobe, there's cell loss in the conflict active phase, there will be pain. And it will be mild to severe when they are conflict active. There's cell replenishment in the healing phase. There'll be swelling, abdominal pain, pressure pain. They'll feel that. It's a different kind of pain. The epicrisis will have acute pain or cramps or spasm that can last, over a day or so. If they've had a hanging healing, they'll pass a gallstone. If this is their first time with this program, they will not pass a gallstone. They might also have troubled circulation, dizzy spells, and they might faint or just feel like, oh man, I feel kind of woozy, I need to sit down. So we have all of that information just by knowing the program that is running in their client. We know what program it is, how it got there, how it will progress. How does that help us as practitioners? So I'm just really laying the groundwork here. First of all, GNM is just science. It's a new version of pathology, if you will. It's a new view of physiology. It's conclusive. There's no guesswork. Everyone's body runs the same way. We all have the same wiring. What is different for all of us is our perception of the world. It gives us the why. What is going on in our body and why? It clarifies the questions to ask our clients. It guides us so we know what to ask so we can really get the bigger picture. And it allows us to see the bigger picture. It takes body, mind, spirit to entirely new levels. So it really helps to guide us. It helps the client because you now know, okay, they're conflict active. Now you know I'm going to help them reduce their conflict activity so their healing phase will be less. That will minimize discomfort in the healing phase. Or if they have a hanging healing, you're going to know how to help them resolve that. You'll also know how to prepare them for the healing phase so they know what to expect. There may be pain, swelling, inflammation. They would want to know that so they don't, freak out and go into fear. You'll know how to support and strengthen their body in conjunction with these two phases. And it's really about educating them more on why they have fatigue, if that's what they're coming in for, and how to get more energy. So it's an accurate system, very accurate. It's very empowering. I will say that much. It's very, very empowering. When you have more knowledge and greater insight using the tools you have already as a nutritionist and anything else you do, you use it in conjunction with this biology, you become more effective. And this is exactly what happened to me. I had much more effectiveness with my clients. The benefits for your clients is they're better informed, they're more empowered, they're healthier and happier. Literally, they will be loyal to you and they will refer to you. They will be telling people about, oh my gosh, I can't believe in one day this thing is gone. Okay, that is pretty much the end. I want to say that I do teach 2 courses. One of them is for everyone. It's a 4-week online program. I say it's 4 weeks. It's evergreen. You start it anytime you want. You have access to the full course, including weekly live teleconferences forever, which is awesome. I find that because this is an entirely new paradigm, people need support in how to understand it. So I decided to structure my course so that I gave them weekly support. So we create community because we all need a village. We need a GNM village around us. And then I have a program for practitioners, and that is 4 weeks as well. It's 4 classes, I should say. We do it over about 6 weeks. The next one's in October, then I'll do another one in early spring. So yeah, I guess I'll ask if there's any questions at this point.
No, but I do have a note here from Sarah Petenel, who also works with the NANP, and she's saying, Andi, when I met with you briefly at the NANP conference and you shared some insight with me regarding my health condition, many of my symptoms resolved within a day or 2, and I'm very excited about this.
Woohoo!
Yeah, I just wanted to give you that feedback. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Sarah, that's great. That is exactly what happens with GNM. And what I'm teaching people to do is you use GNM as kinesiology in the body. And so if somebody comes to you with pain, swelling, inflammation, once you help them determine the conflict, their pain, swelling, inflammation instantly reduces. And that's how you know you're on the right track. So that's how I work with folks now. I just had somebody who's had tremors for 5 years and in her hands, and it was started on her right side. So we know, because we know laterality, that had to do with her partner. And then it's now spread to her left hand. We know why that is as well when you know GNM. Well, over the course of an hour, we got her symptoms from a 5 on a 1 to 10 scale. We got her tremors from a 5 down to a 1.5. And we ran out of time. I would have gotten them to a 0, but we ran out of time. So this is what we do with GNM. It is absolutely amazing.
Okay, so Mary Ann's asking, so we know how to support our clients nutritionally, but as holistic nutritionists, we aren't typically taught how to help clients with their mental state. Does the program teach you how to resolve these conflicts by working with the client's mental state? How to get them back to parasympathetic phase mentally and physically?
Well, I will say I don't work with mental states either. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I guess we maybe have to clarify what that is. So when I was working with this woman with the tremors, all I did was ask questions. I'm not a psychologist. I don't go there. I'm just asking, okay, what happened next? I know this has to do with her husband. I know what the conflict is, and I know who it is in her life. I have to just get her there. So it was a roundabout circuit for her to get back to, oh, it's because of this incident in my life. And we did. And so it's not like you work on a psychology level with them. You do not. You simply ask questions.
Okay, so Andi, to clarify, are you saying then that we wouldn't typically work with somebody who had mental health issues because perhaps they couldn't understand like the level of conversation?
Oh, that's a great question. I love it. So Dr. Hamer, after he mapped out the entire brain. So we know the cause of pretty much every single disease that's out there. We don't know rabies. That's the only one. But we know the cause of every single disease out there. We know the conflict shock that goes with every one of them, which is incredibly empowering information. And so, okay, I just went on, what was the question again?
Well, basically, should we avoid working with people who've got mental health?
Okay.
Right, so because they may not be able to understand the conversations that we're having,
right,
or the perception could be distorted.
Right. So once he figured out the entire brain, he mapped out the entire brain, he then turned his attention to mental illness, what you and I would call mental illness, psychoses, sociopaths, manic, mania, depression, bipolar, all of that. He discovered it all follows biological laws as well. So we also know the cause of every single psychiatric diagnosis out there. So when you know GNM and you know it well, and you know what he calls the constellations, which is what we would call mental illness, then you know what you can work with and what you can't. But it is very much on a biological level that you are working with them. And it's very, very practical. So in other words, if we know that this person gets triggered and they go into a manic rage, they get aggressive every time somebody cuts them off in traffic, then you can work with them as a coach if you want to and say, well, the next time somebody cuts you off in traffic, what can you do? What's a course of action you can do? And you help them discover what is inside them that would work for them. I can count to 10. I can take some deep breaths. I can call my partner and have a nice chat. It's very practical information.
Okay, fantastic. So somebody's asking, they've recently graduated, they're interested in your practitioner program. Are you okay to share costs and start date and things?
Oh, sure. I gotta remember them. So let's see, if you take the 4-week program, the basic program here on the left, that's $297. And let me think, if you take, I've got a couple of prices on the practitioner course. So if you want to sign up for both, I give you like $100 discount. So it's like, oh gosh, $844, and that includes this one. Otherwise, this is like, I don't remember. It's on my website. I'm so sorry. I think it's like $900 for both, but if you do both together, it's less. It's no more than it's around $800, $850 for both of them. Okay. You can payment plans too. There's two. If you want the GNM for practitioners, you can do a 2-month payment plan. So it's like $447, I think. And then there's a pay in full price. And then I also have a price that if you took this, then there's a separate price for this, which is $6 something.
Okay, so maybe we could share that in the email that's going to go out with the replay.
Yes, I will look it up.
No problem. No problem. Somebody's saying, would you do both classes? What's the difference?
Well, everyone has to take the beginning course. It's just a matter of, do you pay for it separately or do you pay for them together? Everyone takes the first course because you can't learn to apply it, which is the GNM for practitioners, until you learn it. So they're the same course. If you take GNM for practitioners, you're going to start with this course.
Okay, so the first program is just someone who wants the overview, doesn't necessarily going to go use it in practice.
Right, this is for anyone, whether you're a practitioner or you're a layperson.
Okay.
If you want to learn, after you've learned the basic principles, you want to apply it to your patients, your clients, then you take this one.
Okay, that's good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just going to see if we have any more questions. I don't see any. Well, Andi, that was fantastic. So thank you so much. That's going to bring us to the end of this discussion. So thank you everyone for attending. There will be a replay tomorrow with links to Andi's program. So next month, our guests will be Mary Shanila Golella and Michael Lee Valley. Now their topic will be how to harvest the low-hanging fruit, secrets to getting more clients and creating an abundant practice. So please mark your calendars. That's Thursday, September the 12th. Plan for joining us for another great webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us on the call today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, bye for now.
Bye-bye.